Jorge Joestar. Chapter 7. Airplanes. The English were unpleasant in their own very English way. It was as if they lived at the top of the world, and naturally looked down on everyone else. Looked down in the sense that everyone else was clearly beneath them, so what else could they do? No spite or guilt, just, why doesn't everyone else try harder? There was a hint of warmth to their contempt that I found especially deplorable. How could such scumbags sit pretending to be gentlemen, acting as if they made the world spin while sipping tea and discussing the state of the world? If this was the English, the Spaniards back on the Canary Islands were far better. They were cocky and violent, but never tried to pretend they were in the right. They never explained to you how their tyranny was based on logical superiority, and besides, if they left the trash to themselves, they'd never amount to anything, yes? I never realised that true arrogance presented itself as elegance. True class, to my mind, was evident without resorting to pretense. In that sense, I found no true gentlemen or ladies in the Joestar family's ancestral home, Wastewood. Every single one of them treated our apparent differences as a means by which they could once again justify their own superiority. The Joestar family's recent contributions to Wastewood history had been the slaughter of the head of the family and a great number of policemen by an adopted son, followed by a fire that burned the man into the ground, and in the surviving heir had married, only to die in a shipwreck on his honeymoon. Even once my mother returned, all we got was, "Eh? The Joestar girl survived. My, you had a child and lived on your own in the Canary Islands. How sturdy of you. So you've come home, although you never really lived here, did you? Well, that hospital your father ran was handed over to new management quite some time ago, so you really have no family here at all. It's been a burnt heap of rubble for 20 years. I never imagined seeing the Joestar Manor rebuilt. Oh, you know the president of the Speedwagon Company? He's helping you rebuild, is he? He's a bachelor and you have 2 children. It must be tough. Oh, really? That girl isn't yours? Not even of noble birth. I see. Well, you're still Pendleton's daughter and a fine woman, although it's been much too long since your wedding to really re-enter society. And your son doesn't seem to fit at the club. But enough about practical matters. Tell us more about life in the island. You must have had so many adventures. My mother just smiled and nodded, and said it had all been quite a bizarre adventure, and since staying at home led to nothing but this sort of neighbourly assault, she quickly began commuting to London. In the city was the hospital my mother's father had founded, now even larger. Graham Pendleton had retired, and the hospital was now run by someone else, but a controlling interest in the stock was owned by mother and my grandfather, and she'd stayed in contact with him the entire time we were on the Canary Islands. My mother started her own company not far from the hospital, effectively transferring the headquarters of the Starmark Tradings Company she'd founded from the Canary Islands to London. The office back on the islands remained, and additional ships from England increased the volume they could trade. England and Spain being presently engaged in a struggle for control of the seas, this arrangement allowed her to play both sides, purchasing goods in Spain to sell in England, leading to a steady increase in profits. Both mother and Penelope, who was working with her, seemed full of life and fun, while I had transferred to my father's old school, Hugh Hudson High, and was being bullied again. Judging by the amount of people who called me George with a J, the fact that I was a fallen aristocrat amused my classmates endlessly, but at the same time the economic success my mother had was impossible not to notice locally, and made them all frantically jealous. On top of that, it was very easy to make fun of anyone with a single-mother household, and well, quite a number of things were said to me. I never really minded what they said about me. When they couldn't get a reaction out of me, they got mad, and one idiot fumbled his way into insulting my mother, which I couldn't abide. On the Canary Islands, I'd been too afraid to ever get in a fistfight. Suddenly I found myself taking 3 or 4 at a time, swinging wildly. I lost, of course. Fights always won by whoever has more people on their side. This was high school. We were all grown up, and our punches and kicks hurt quite a lot. But I was ecstatic. I could finally take a swing at somebody. At the same time I felt hollow. However slimy my opponents were, they were just high school boys. Normal humans, not evil vampires or zombies. My fights were sleepy scraps in a world of peace. It all seemed so stupid I began refusing to engage with them no matter what they said. Mother told me to ignore them and worried about my injuries, and Penelope was furious and started slurp summoning locked room clowns, so anyone who fought me was in grave danger, but mostly I just got bored by it all, fed up, by melancholy, violent, endlessly peaceful days. I remember the time I'd spent with Sukumajuku. All that time spent hunting serial killers, solving locked room murders, getting trapped in mansions on deserted islands. I missed the adrenaline rush, of course, but what I really wanted was my friendship with him. The ability to talk about anything, to say what I liked, real laughs, real anger. I was 16 now, and the thought was embarrassing, but I wanted a friend. It didn't seem likely I'd ever make one. I thought I couldn't make friends on the Canary Islands because everyone was Spanish, but I couldn't make friends with the English either. Because of this, I started spending more and more time on my own, and since it was the country, the only place in Westwood where I wouldn't run into someone I knew was the sea. Since there were steep cliffs along the coast, the only person who ever wandered around there was me, and I went almost every day. And that was where I met the Motorize siblings. At first I thought they were getting in the way of my gloomy cliff stalking. I was staring at the sea and remembering how much I didn't want to go back to the Canary Islands, when I saw them carrying something with a pair of huge rings, like a giant bird, up to the cliff's edge. Were they going to push it over and make it fly? Seemed like a waste to make something like that and then throw it into the sea. Then, to my surprise, the girl wiggled in underneath it, inside of it. What is she? Is she trying to fly that thing? Really? The wind on these cliffs weren't strong enough to lift more than a leaf. There was no way it would work. I was so shocked I started laughing. Before I could call out to her to stop, the boy shoved the big construct towards the edge of the cliff, with the girl still inside. He didn't even hesitate. Huh? Ah! I ran towards them yelling, but too late. The tail of the bird the girl was riding had tipped up, and it slipped over the edge of the cliff. She was falling. Shit! These cliffs are at least 30 metres tall. The water is deep, but from that height, she'd be lucky to survive the impact. I had to save her. Hoping to pull her out of the ocean, I ran to the cliff edge nearest to me. I could see the nose of the bird on the surface below. I couldn't see the girl anywhere in the pounding surf. I ran quickly along the cliff edge until I was right above the sunken bird, shouted, "I'll be back for you!" at her killer, who seemed startled by my sudden approach, and with that, I flung myself off the cliff. And as I did, the bird shot past me with the girl still inside. Both the girl and I said, "Huh?" at the same time. I turned in the air, staring after the girl and the bird, and thought, shit, I did it again. I was always throwing myself headlong into danger without a second's thought. Sukumajuku used to lecture me about it all the time, but judging by the speed the cliffs were moving away from me, I was about to hit the water, and should probably brace myself. 30 metres. Doable? I thought it was. I stretched my arms up, and did my best to hit the water straight on. I took a quick breath, but before I hit, the boy from the cliff caught up with me, wrapped his arms around my body, and suddenly we were speeding along in a totally different direction, along the surface of the ocean. My entire body was still braced for impact, and I had trouble adjusting to this turn of events. What the hell were you thinking? He said. If you looked up for 1 second, you'd have seen the glider. Tell me you aren't hurt. I still couldn't bring myself to speak, so I just shook my head. There were these things on his shoulders dripping with some dark red goo, and they were folding up and stretching out, and were covered in long flat hair, and then they turned and we left the sea and flew up into the air. He had wings, and they were covered in blood. Was he not human? Yeah, cat, I heard someone shout. Over the bird boy's shoulders I could see the girl I tried to save in her bird-shaped machine, flying alongside us. Man, they gave me a heart attack, she said, laughing hysterically. I stared at her in horror. We'd better land, the bird boy said. Right, I'll let the coming that then. You okay, Stephen? Ugh. Ah, and thank you, she said, catching my eye. What for? You were right about me, right? You went running straight off that cliff. Dash and bound. I saw the whole thing. Stay on the cliff, she said, threw me a kiss, and turned the wings of her machine away from us. I'd assumed Bird Boy was her boyfriend, so this set my heart racing for 2 reasons. But the real reason my heart was racing was seeing that girl flying around in her bird machine, and how it had no obvious form of propulsion. But there it was, flying up, down, left, right, never falling totally free. Even after the bird boy had deposited me safely on the top of the cliff, I stood riveted, watching her fly, obsessed with this new power. I'm jealous. I want one. Everyone will be riding them soon enough. Eh? Really? How? Does seem like something anyone could do. You can if you practice a bit, just like driving a car. Maybe we won't be able to fly like her, but it won't be long before they make ones anyone can handle. Like a car? Then she isn't using some sort of special power to make that fly? What do you mean? I mean like those wings of yours. No, that's just science, no special powers. But that thing looks too heavy to fly. It was hardly a leaf. It is if you don't handle it right. You've never seen an airplane before? Airplane? Was that thing an airplane? If air flows under the wings, it pushes them up. Normally they have an engine making a propeller spin and build speed. But we don't have the money or the engineering skills. So the best we can do is make a one-man glider out of wood and cloth. I got even more excited. If normal people can make something like that, there is every chance I could fly one. If these things were going to be as common as cars, then I would absolutely be flying one day, someday. Amazing! I would be able to fly. I'd been sure I'd just met 2 more people with mysterious powers, but I guess that wasn't true for the girl. I looked over at the bird boy, and he folded his wings up and was sitting down. The bleeding had stopped, but the flesh on the wings looked really soft, and what I could see of his back through the holes in his shirt made it clear there was lots of bruising around the base of the wings, and some yellow bubbles oozing out. Guess this was why the girl had been concerned. He was clearly not okay. Sorry, this was all my mistake. Forget about it. Looks painful. Very painful. Yeah, but I'm used to it, and it'll be fine in a bit. And you're more surprised by the plane than my wings. Huh? Just so happens I'm used to strange things. Yeah? So how'd you end up like this? Well, wait, I said, remembering how Penelope's got hers. If it hurts to talk about, forget I asked. Can't say there wasn't pain involved, but that makes it sound like a much more interesting story than it is. I've never told anyone the story. Hardly anyone else has ever seen my rings. He fell silent, so I didn't pry further. I looked back at the glider. Just watching it brought me joy, and given what Stephen had said about the future, I found myself looking forward to what was to come for the first time in my life. I suddenly felt like all sorts of extraordinary things were going to happen. I'm definitely flying one of those. Absolutely. Positively. I heard Stephen laughing behind me. Well, given how quick you jumped off that cliff, those kind of guts is just what you need to be a pilot. Guts? Nobody else had ever accused me of having those before. Stephen's sister Kenton came sliding in for a gentle landing on top of the cliffs. We looked the glider over, and except for a few grass stains, it was completely unharmed. While I was busy being surprised and impressed, they swiftly broke the glider down and loaded it into the back of their wagon. They gave me a lift, and I ended up back at their house. At this point it finally occurred to me to introduce myself, and they were both taken aback. You're the Joestar boy? Our grandfather was friends with your grandfather. Your grandfather's name was George too, right? Kenton asked. I nodded, but my name's spelled George, with a J. Oh, but spelled that way, would you pronounce it Jorge? Don't people call you that? They do, both on the Canary Island and here in England. So, we've been getting along rather well. Were they going to start mocking me now? Do you know a girl named Darlington? No. You don't? She's in a class. I don't know anybody's name at school. I guess you did say you transferred. I hadn't said that yet. Something Darlington? Huh? What's her first name? Oh, Darlington's her first name. My kid's sister. I know it sounds like a last name. It is a last name too. Same goes for my name. Dad named us both after old friends of his. Since he can't very well give girls boys' names, he gave us their last names. Awful, isn't it? So, Darlington Motorize? Yes, our little princess. I'm sure you've noticed her. She's the cutest girl in your class. The one with the curly hair. I don't remember a girl like that. No wonder she's so mad about it. Thank you so much, Jorge Joestar. Our little princess is getting a bit too vain. You've been good medicine. So this girl was waiting for us at the Motorize residence? No matter where you went, someone was there, and they were connected to someone else. It was just like La Palma. I sighed. Give her a chance, Stephen said. He was sitting on the right side of the wagon, holding the reins. I agree she's a bit vain, but she's not a bad kid, and she's more than just a pretty face. I remained unenthused. The Motorize estate was still properly aristocratic, with a huge garden, large mansion and a butler. We rolled the wagon straight into the shed. While we were unloading the glider, the butler and Darlington came in. "I've brought you both some tea," she said. "Oh, aren't you in my class?" I took a good look at her, but couldn't say for sure if I'd ever seen her in class. "What?" she said, somehow looking both anxious and victorious at the same time. "Sorry, I'm afraid I don't remember you. I'm Jorge Joestar," I said, holding out my hand. Darlington sulked for a second, but then took my hand. "Darlington Motorize," she said. "This is our butler, Faraday. Give George some tea, too. Oh, Stephen, your wings. Did Kenton have another accident?" No, that's my fault," I said. Darlington glared at me. "What did you do? Every time Stephen opens his wings, it takes him 3 weeks to heal, you know. He can't go to school that whole time, so you owe him." I hadn't expected it to take that much time. I'd imagined it was a momentary thing, like Penelope's wound. I looked at Stephen, and he said, "Knock it off, Da. George tried to save Ken. He could well have hurt himself worse than me trying. I'm used to it by now. He's fine. Not like we need to call a doctor for it. There's nothing anybody can do to help." "But it takes 3 weeks. What about school?" I asked. Stephen laughed. "I don't exactly take school seriously to begin with. I can learn what I need on my own, and it means more time I can spend on gliders." "Besides that," Kenton said, "you both here there because you want to know Jorge Joestar, making Faraday join in your weird little pantomime." "What nonsense." "But he never once bought us tea before, ever." "Hey, don't you pretend I didn't know his name. Aren't you in my class?" "Ha ha 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 ha." "Stop it. It's so nonsense, I swear," Darlington shrieked. Then she left in a huff, angrily stamping her way through the mud. Kenton watched her go, laughing hysterically. "Ken, knock it off. I'm starting to feel sorry for her," Stephen said. "You know she's just going to take it out on Faraday and Dad." "But it's so cute." "It's always like this," he sighed. I'd have stayed as far away from any of this as possible, but they were his sisters, and Stephen seemed hopelessly nice.